They say you never really know the people you share your table with until the knife turns toward you. I learned that truth the night I realized my own daughter and her husband were planning to take my kidney. Not for love, not to save me, but to pay off his gambling debts. My name is Jeremy Collins, 68, retired carpenter from New Jersey. I spent 40 years building homes for other families, yet somehow failed to notice mine was rotting from the inside. When Emily, my only daughter, married Ethan, I thought she'd found a good man. He was polite, hardworking, at least that's what I wanted to believe. "You raised a wonderful woman, Mr. Collins," he used to say, flashing that perfect, practiced grin. I mistook manipulation for manners. After my heart surgery last spring, Emily insisted I move in with them. "Just until you recover, Dad," she said. Their house was small but warm. A narrow two-story in a quiet New Jersey neighborhood, the kind where people wave from their driveways but never really know each other's business. I felt like a burden at first, but she kept reminding me, family takes care of family. If only she meant that. Ethan worked in construction, or so he claimed. He left before dawn and came home after dark, always with new excuses. The boss is late on payments, the client's dragging the deal, or someone messed up the numbers. At first, I sympathized. I'd worked through lean years too. But when I started noticing the unopened mail piling up behind the microwave, thick envelopes stamped in red, my sympathy turned into suspicion. One morning, while making coffee, I pulled one out. It wasn't a bill. It was a final notice from a debt collector in Atlantic City. My stomach dropped. I'd heard whispers about Ethan's poker games before, but Emily always defended him. "He only plays for fun, Dad. Don't worry." She had no idea how deep he'd fallen. Then came the night that changed everything. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain against the windows. I couldn't sleep. The scar on my chest ached when the weather turned cold. Around midnight, I heard their voices from the living room. Ethan's was low and sharp, Emily's trembling. "The doctor said he's a perfect match," Ethan hissed. "One kidney. That's all. The old man's barely using both anyway." My breath caught in my throat. "Ethan, are you insane? You can't just. We need money, Em. You don't understand what they'll do if I don't pay up." Silence. Then her voice, broken. Maybe he'd do it if he thought it was for me. For me. Those two words tore through me like a blade. My daughter, my little girl, who used to sit on my shoulders to watch fireworks at the fair, was now conspiring to deceive me. To take a part of me to save a man who'd already sold his soul to the wrong people. I sat in the dark for hours after that. I remember watching the faint reflection of the TV light flicker across the window, my hands trembling around a cup of cold coffee. I wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. That night, it was grief. The kind that feels like a slow collapse inside your chest. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. You don't build a house by slamming bricks together. You lay the foundation first. And revenge, like carpentry, requires precision. When I walked into the kitchen that morning, Ethan was already there, flipping pancakes, humming like he didn't have a care in the world. "Morning, Pops," he said, grinning. "How's the heart today?" I looked him straight in the eye and smiled back. "Still beating," I said. "Stronger every day." He didn't notice the way I held his gaze, or maybe he thought I was too old to matter. That was his mistake. Because while he was busy covering lies with syrup and charm, I was already planning how to take everything from him. Slowly, quietly, and with the same tools I'd used all my life. Patience, skill, and a steady hand. They thought I was weak. They thought I was naive. But the truth is, I'd spent decades building homes from nothing. Now, I was going to rebuild myself by destroying theirs. After that night, nothing looked the same. The kitchen smelled of betrayal instead of coffee. The sunlight through the window seemed too bright, like it was mocking me for believing I still had a family. Emily still kissed my cheek in the mornings, still called me Dad, but I heard the hesitation in her voice now, the guilt that bled through every word. I could feel her avoiding my eyes, afraid I'd see what she'd done. I didn't let on. I played my role perfectly. The frail old man recovering from heart surgery, polite, quiet, harmless. But every day I watched. I started keeping notes in an old carpenter's notebook, the kind I used for sketching designs. Only this time, I wasn't drawing blueprints for a house. I was drawing a plan for destruction. First, I needed to understand Ethan's world. The debts, the threats, the people he owed. I remembered one of the letters I'd found behind the microwave. It mentioned a place, the Neptune Club in Atlantic City, a gambling hole pretending to be a private lounge. So I waited for an opportunity. Ethan was sloppy. He kept his keys and wallet in the same bowl by the door. One afternoon, when Emily was at work and he'd stepped out for a business call, I quietly went through his wallet. Inside was a crumpled card, Neptune Club, members only. On the back, a phone number scribbled in shaky handwriting. I called it that night from a payphone near the old gas station. The man who answered sounded like gravel and whiskey. "You calling for Ethan?" "Yeah," I said, disguising my voice with a cough. "He told me to check on his balance. He's overdue. Tell him he's out of extensions. Next time he walks through the door, we collect, one way or another." That was all I needed to hear. Ethan wasn't just in trouble, he was drowning. And my kidney wasn't the only thing he was trying to sell. I checked the garage later that week and found tools, appliances, even my old power saw listed on an online marketplace under a fake name. He was stripping the house piece by piece, turning it into cash before anyone noticed. Still, I said nothing. Revenge, I reminded myself, isn't about reaction. It's about timing. One morning, I asked him casually, "You still seeing Dr. Miller at St. Anne's for your checkups?" He froze for half a second, just long enough. Yeah, sure. Why?" "Thought I'd schedule my next heart exam there too. Maybe I'll run into you." He laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. That's when I knew the hospital was part of the setup. I visited St. Anne's the next day under the excuse of picking up my medical records. The nurse at the reception, kind, middle-aged woman with tired eyes, looked up my file and handed me a folder. "You're Jeremy Collins, right? We just received the donor compatibility results." "Donor?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. "Yes, for Emily and her husband's referral." It felt like the floor disappeared under me. Ethan had already processed my medical information with my daughter's signature. I thanked her, smiled, and walked out into the freezing March wind, my hands trembling. For a moment, I thought about confronting them right then, screaming, tearing the house apart until they told me the truth. But that would have been too easy, too kind. Instead, I called an old friend, George Atkins, a lawyer I'd worked with years ago when I helped rebuild his office after a fire. George owed me a favor. I told him I needed help setting up something quiet. He didn't ask too many questions, just said, "Come by tomorrow." That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Ethan moved around upstairs. I pictured him, smug and confident, thinking he had everything under control. But he didn't know I'd already started pulling the nails from his perfect little world. The next morning, I drove to George's office. The plan was simple: build legal traps before emotional ones. George helped me set up a temporary living trust, transferring all my savings and property under his management until further notice. That meant Ethan and Emily couldn't touch a cent, no matter what happened to me. When I came back home, Ethan greeted me at the door, his tone syrupy. "Out for a drive, Pops? You look better already." "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "I guess I'm getting stronger." He didn't notice the envelope sticking out of my coat pocket, the one containing copies of every fake signature, every hospital form, every piece of evidence that would ruin him. The day they planned to take something from me was getting closer. But so was the day I'd take everything from them. I just needed to wait for the right moment, the moment when their greed would blind them completely. And when that moment came, I'd make sure they never forgot what it feels like to lose something that can't be replaced. They say a man shows his true self when pressed between a rock and a hard place. I had watched Ethan for weeks, waiting for that pressure to reveal him. What I found was worse than I expected. After George set up the trust, I felt a small, cold relief, like the first plank in a new foundation. But legal paper doesn't change hearts. It doesn't stop a desperate man from trying to pry a house apart with his hands. It only buys time. Time was what I needed. Emily kept trying to act normal. She smiled at breakfast, tucked a napkin under my chin, fussed over my pills. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her crying softly in the bathroom. Once she slipped and left a wet towel on the floor where I found it the next morning. The towel smelled faintly of perfume and cigarettes. It was a small thing, but in a house full of lies, small things matter. I started following Ethan's patterns like a carpenter tracing a worn edge. He left the house at odd hours, and sometimes came back with the smell of smoke and cheap liquor on his coat. He had friends I'd never met. Faces that belonged to those who eat quick meals in dark places and disappear when the light comes on. I learned their names eventually. Marco, a thin man with darting eyes. Darius, who laughed too loud and never paid for his drinks. And a shadowy figure everyone called Boss, who preferred not to be seen. One wet Thursday, I followed Ethan to Atlantic City. I hadn't been there since my 20s. The boardwalk had lost some of its shine, the neon signs flickering like tired beacons. I parked 2 blocks away and watched him slip into a side door with Marco at his shoulder. A moment later, Darius came out alone, breathing hard, fingers trembling with something he tried to hide in his coat. I could have gone in. I nearly did. But you don't storm a building when you're carrying a match. You wait for the wind. Instead, I took pictures. My old phone, the one the kids bought me for my birthday, clicked quietly as I snapped their faces, the car license plates, the entrance sign with the faded gold letters, Neptune Club. I sent the photos to George with a short note. Evidence. We need to leverage this. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the light above me buzzing like an annoyed fly. Emily came in, wrapped in her robe, eyes red. I could see the weight she carried in the slump of her shoulders. She tried to pretend, the way people do when they're ashamed, but she left a trail of things behind her like breadcrumbs. Coffee? I asked. She nodded and poured 2 cups, hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything. Instead, she rinsed the cup and put it in the dripping rack, avoiding my eyes. She moved like someone who'd been rehearsing the same lie for months. Emily, I said quietly, pushing the cup closer to her. I know things. She flinched, then laughed, a brittle sound. What things, Dad? The kind you can't unsay. The kind that bend a life out of shape so much it doesn't look like it belongs to you anymore. I kept my voice even. I wanted her to feel the weight of each word like a hammer, slow and unavoidable. You signed medical forms. You called doctors. You let them think I was a donor. I watched her face bleed through every color. Denial, guilt, shame. Why, Em? Why would you do that? She leaned against the counter, her robe slipping off one shoulder like a tired curtain. You don't understand, she whispered. Her voice broke, then steadied. He said he'd leave if I didn't help. He promised he'd change if I just, she swallowed. I was scared, Dad. I thought if I saved him, everything would be okay. Saving him by losing me, I said. It wasn't a question. It was the arithmetic of betrayal. Do you love him more than you love yourself? Then you love me? My words landed like nails. Tears slid down her face. She opened her mouth to speak and closed it again. For a long time, neither of us moved. The kitchen clock ticked in the small hours, marking the seconds we'd never get back. I didn't want to, Dad, she said finally, voice thin. I thought, maybe if he got the help, he'd stop. I thought I could fix him. The old pattern, women thinking love can be a wrench to pry a man loose from his vices, rose like steam from a kettle. I tried to stop him. I tried to say no. But he started bringing people around. He said I had to help him. I was scared. You were scared of losing him, I said. Not of losing me. Her lips trembled with something like regret. I'm sorry, she said. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back what's taken, I said. Honesty was a blunt tool. She needed it, like the rotten beams that needed replacement in a house I used to mend. That night, I let her sleep on the couch. I pretended I didn't hear her phone buzz at 3 in the morning when Ethan texted, "We have a date." A date. As if a man could schedule a theft like a dinner reservation. The trap had to be set so the act would reveal itself in public, where shame could do its worst. I thought of the Neptune Club and the men who collected debts like tolls on a bridge. They wanted flesh. They chose the organ of life itself. If they were willing to stoop to buying a kidney, then they were willing to make deals that left footprints. Footprints you can use. I began to plant evidence like a careful gardener setting seeds. I let small things slide to make Ethan bolder. A key left on the table, a file accidentally left on the kitchen counter, a voicemail I pretended not to hear. I smiled when he bragged about having a plan. I nodded when he explained away absences. At the same time, I made friends in unexpected places. There was a nurse at St. Anne's, quiet, steady, named Marta, who had taken an interest in my recovery. I heard her laugh once in the elevator. It was a sound that reminded me of simpler things. I told her, casually, that I'd been thinking about getting my affairs in order, that I wanted to make sure none of my accounts were vulnerable. She offered to point me to a records clerk she trusted, someone who could retrieve the scheduling logs and referral notes. I accepted. Everything moved like a slow machine. The trust in place, the photos sent to George, the records quietly requested. My hands itched to act, to dig, to break. But patience was the frame that would hold the house when the storm hit. I could feel the moment approaching, the hinge on which everything would swing. One night, a voicemail came through to Emily's phone. I heard Ethan's voice, brittle and urgent. Tonight, 2 a.m. They'll be at St. Anne's. Don't tell your father. It has to be tonight. The way he said it made the words sound like a bullet. I replayed the message 3 times, each pass making my rage colder, sharper. 2 a.m. was the hour they thought I'd be asleep, vulnerable. They were wrong. I planned to be awake, and when they moved, I would show up not as the old man they thought they could use, but as a man who'd been rebuilding himself in secret. They were close to the edge. So was I? Once someone crosses a line to take a piece of you, there's no going back. The point of no return had arrived for them. For me, it was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lamp turned low, the TV off, listening to the house breathe. Every sound had a meaning now. The refrigerator's hum, the tick of the old mantel clock, the creak from upstairs when Ethan rolled over. 2 a.m. hung above the rooms like a storm cloud. I had to be ready. The plan needed to be surgical. If I rushed, they'd smell the fear and shift their course. If I wavered, they'd take what they wanted and vanish. So I moved with the slow, careful certainty of a man who'd once measured rafters by eye. Each step had to be precise. First, the logistics. I called George and left a coded message. Tonight's the night. Bring the papers. He showed up an hour later in a dark coat, eyes quick and kind. We met in my car in the grocery store parking lot, like 2 conspirators. I handed him a stamped envelope filled with copies of the hospital forms, Emily's signature, the referral notes, dates, times. George read them twice, his jaw tightening. He didn't flinch when I told him what I planned. Lawyers learn the art of calm. Jeremy, he said softly, you sure you want to do this the way you're thinking? Once we walk in, there's no stepping back. I'm sure, I said. The truth tastes like metal in my mouth. They tried to sell me for cash. There's no stepping back from that. George nodded and slid a small recorder across the dashboard. I'll be ready at St. Anne's. I'll call security. Don't do anything reckless. Let the law do its work once we have them on tape. We both knew the law moves slow and clumsy, but public shame moves faster. My hope was to marry both. Make the moment so undeniable that the police wouldn't have a choice, and the neighborhood would taste their betrayal like cold iron. Back at the house, I made coffee I didn't intend to drink, walked the rooms I'd once fixed with my hands, and straightened picture frames as if to remind myself that things I loved still mattered. At 1:30 a.m., I pretended to go to bed. I kept the lamp on by the stairs and left my hearing aid on the table. Little deceptions were now part of the strategy. Make them comfortable. Let them underestimate the old man. At 1:50 a.m., Ethan came down to the kitchen, shoes whispering against the floor. He moved like a man who knows the house is empty of witnesses. I watched him from the stairwell, my silhouette a dark blade. He was careful, but his breath was shallow, a nervous animal's rhythm. He checked the door, then the hallway, then the clock. His phone buzzed. He read a message and cursed softly. 2 a.m., confirmed. He slipped a small bag into his jacket. I imagined cash or something worse. Emily followed him a minute later, face pale, hair wrapped in a loose bun. She looked like a woman who had been crying all day. When Ethan saw her, he smoothed his shirt and tried to smile. It was the same practiced grin I'd seen at the wedding, now worn ragged at the edges. You sure about this? She whispered. He shrugged, words clipped. We get the money. Then we're free. It's just one night. Just one night, she echoed, but I heard the tremor. 2 people repeating a lie to make it feel true. They crept out the back door on tiptoe, closing it softly behind them. I waited 10 heartbeats, then counted to 50. I walked to the coat closet, grabbed my cane, and slipped outside through the garage. The night air hit like a hand against my face, cold and sharp. My breath came in even puffs. I had rehearsed this walk in my head 100 times. The car was parked 2 houses down. I kept to the shadows and walked parallel to the street, so the Neptune Club side entrance would take them past me like actors passing the stage. I saw them. Ethan's shoulders hunched, Emily beside him small and wrapped in his shadow. Marco lingered near the doorway like a vulture sizing up spoils. From across the street, I dialed George. His voice was a whisper in my ear. You see them? 2 minutes, I said. We had arranged for a janitor at St. N's to leave a side door unlocked. A favor for a favor. It was stupidly simple. Make the entrance easy for them, then watch them step into the trap. We weren't forcing anything. We were letting them reveal themselves. They walked in, heads bent, the way thieves do when they think no one's looking. I followed at a distance, slipping inside the hospital's dim side corridor. The fluorescent lights above hummed like bees. My cane tapped the linoleum. I kept to the shadows and let them move forward. At the reception area, Ethan spoke in a low voice to a nurse who'd been paid to look away. He handed over a folder. He did everything they'd practiced. The nod, the fake paperwork, the whispered story about how I was weak and might agree if handled gently. My skin crawled. We waited until they were led to a back consultation room. George had already notified a security guard under the pretense of a possible disturbance. The guard took his post outside the door like an uninterested sentinel. I sat in the corridor and watched the minutes stretch. When Ethan emerged, empty-handed, he looked relieved, and for a second I thought we'd missed our moment. Then he walked back toward Emily and whispered, "Tonight, 2 a.m. You got it ready?" She nodded, swallowing. That was enough. I hit record on the small device in my pocket and stepped into the light. My voice was steady. Ethan, Emily. It was a simple calling of names, nothing theatrical. They turned like deer caught in a headlight. Ethan's face drained of color. Emily's lips parted as if to speak and then closed. "Dad?" she said, shock and pleading folded into the single word. "Hello, Ethan." I walked toward them, my cane tapping the floor with more authority than they expected. "I thought you might be here." Ethan swallowed. "Jeremy, what are you?" George came out from behind a pillar, papers in hand, and the security guard stepped forward. Behind him, the janitor, planted earlier, gave a small nod. In 2 minutes, the corridor filled with witnesses, a lone night nurse, an orderly on his break, the security guard who already had his radio out. "You plan to take a kidney from me," I said, voice cold as a winter beam. "You plan to sell a part of me so you could keep living like a man I don't recognize." I let the words land. They did. Ethan's jaw trembled. Emily put a hand to her mouth as if to stop herself from screaming. Ethan's defenses crumpled in the light we'd brought. He started, then faltered, the rehearsed lies evaporating like breath on glass. "We didn't. I mean, it was supposed to be a donation." "A donation without my consent isn't a gift," George said, stepping forward with the papers and the recorder. He played back the voicemail I'd kept, Ethan's voice edge and panicked. "Tonight, 2 a.m. They'll be at St. Anne's. Don't tell your father." The room was small. The recorded voice echoed like an indictment. People glanced at Ethan with something that wasn't pity. It was a small, sharp thing, judgment. The kind of judgment that makes your throat tighten and your hands tremble. Emily dropped to her knees as if the floor could catch her. "Dad, please," she sobbed. "We were desperate. He said he loved me. I thought I could fix him." Fixing broken men had become her excuse. It would not be enough now. Security radioed headquarters. Someone called the police. Ethan's face went white, then red, then a patchwork of fear. Marco and Darius tried to melt into the shadows, but the guard stepped forward and blocked their path. The Neptune Club men were outside, but word travels fast when your business is illegal. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car's lights painted the corridor in wet blues and the kind of official seriousness that suggests consequences. They looked at me like I was both judge and culprit. I let them look. I wanted them to feel every inch of the weight they'd try to steal from me. As officers took statements, neighbors peered out windows and nurses whispered in halls. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives like a precise knock, and when it opens, everyone sees the mess inside. That night, the door opened. When the officers led Ethan away in handcuffs, he looked at me from across the fluorescent glare. Panic and hatred mixed with a dawning recognition of what he'd done. Emily clung to my leg, weeping, face buried into my coat. I didn't pull away. I let her weep around the man whose breath she'd tried to save with a betrayal. George squeezed my shoulder once, heavy and warm. "You did good, Jeremy," he said quietly. "You did right." But as Ethan was guided into the squad car, I felt something I hadn't expected, the hollow echo of victory. It tasted like an old nail in my mouth, metallic and small. I had won the battle, but the house was still standing damaged, and the pieces that mattered most were hurt. That night, sirens cut through the New Jersey cold. The neighborhood would talk for weeks. The Neptune Club might have to find new clients. The men who'd thought of buying a kidney would think twice about the next desperate deal. They had overreached, and I had closed the door on their plans. The night swallowed the police lights quickly. When the last cruiser rolled away, the street was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. I stood on the porch and watched my breath drift like smoke. Emily sat on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, eyes fixed on her knees. Inside, the clock ticked on like it always did, keeping time for a house that didn't feel like home anymore. The officers had taken Ethan. They'd said words like fraud, forgery, intent to traffic. He'd tried to shout something through the car window before it closed, but the words were lost under the sirens. I didn't care what they were. Maybe excuses, maybe promises, maybe both. It didn't matter. The air around us was cleaner without him. Emily hadn't spoken since they left. The only sound she made was the soft hitch of breath that comes when a person's tears have run dry. I'd spent years fixing broken furniture, bent frames, cracked beams, but I didn't know how to fix what was left in her. I poured her tea and said nothing. There's a kind of silence between a father and daughter that words can't touch. I let it sit, heavy but honest. She finally whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I nodded. "I know, but you'll never forgive me, will you?" I stared into my cup. The reflection looked older than I remembered. Tired eyes, a man hollowed out by too many late nights and half-kept promises. "Forgiveness isn't something you give," I said quietly. "It's something you earn." She looked away, and I knew the road to earning it would be long, maybe longer than either of us had. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People looked at me differently, some with pity, some with admiration. The old carpenter who caught the crook's son-in-law. I didn't want to be a headline in other people's gossip. I just wanted peace. But peace, I learned, comes with echoes. The hospital called. St. Anne's wanted to apologize, quietly, of course. A miscommunication in the donor file, they said. I didn't need apologies. I needed accountability. I made sure the nurse who'd taken the bribe lost her job. George handled the paperwork like clockwork, ensuring my property stayed locked down. Every dollar, every signature, secured. I'd rebuilt my life before. I could do it again. But something unexpected happened that week. A letter arrived. From Ethan. The handwriting was jagged, impatient, a man not used to writing by hand. Inside, just a single page. "Jeremy, you think you're the hero here, but you ruined everything. I did what I had to do. I was desperate. You could have helped us, but you wanted control. You've always wanted control. I hope you're proud of yourself. Tell Emily I'm sorry, if that helps you sleep at night." I folded it once, then again, and set it on the workbench in the garage. I stared at it until my pulse slowed. Then I lit it with the end of a match. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to dust. That was my answer. In the days that followed, I went back to work. Not real work, not the kind that paid. The kind that reminded me of who I was. I built a small birdhouse, painted it blue, and hung it on the maple outside the porch. Watching the birds return in spring reminded me that even ruined things can host new life. Emily started therapy. She visited me every morning with coffee, sometimes staying long enough to help sand a piece of wood or mend a chair. We didn't talk about Ethan anymore. The silence between us changed shape, less of a wound, more of a scar. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the New Jersey rooftops, she asked, "Do you ever regret what you did?" I thought about it for a long moment. Regret? I said, "No. Regret is for those who did nothing when they should have." She nodded slowly. "I guess you did what you had to do." "I did what a father does," I said. I protected what was left. When she left that night, I sat on the porch alone. The birdhouse swayed in the wind. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, and for a second, the sound made my heart jump, a reflex I couldn't shake. Then I smiled. It wasn't fear anymore. It was memory. Revenge doesn't always end with victory. Sometimes it ends with silence, the kind that tells you the storm is finally over. I'd lost a piece of my family, but I'd kept something more important, myself. And as I watched the first star rise over the quiet street, I realized that was enough. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. 6 weeks passed. Spring came to New Jersey, slow and pale. The snow melted from the gutters, the days stretched longer, and for the first time since Ethan's arrest, the house didn't feel haunted. I'd started fixing the porch rail, a job I'd been putting off since before the surgery. The rhythm of sanding, measuring, and driving nails steadied me. It was the only kind of therapy I'd ever trusted. Emily was getting better too. She was quieter now, softer, but her eyes had changed. She'd stopped wearing her wedding ring, and the bruised shame that once sat on her face was fading, replaced by something like resolve. She'd found a job at a local library, quiet, steady work. Some days, she'd come home with paint on her fingers from helping children with craft projects. I liked seeing her hands busy again. It meant her heart was trying to mend. But peace doesn't last long when there are still debts unpaid. It started with a phone call. I was in the workshop, oiling an old hammer handle, when the phone rang. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I answered, expecting another telemarketer. "Is this Jeremy Collins?" a man asked, voice clipped and professional. "Who's asking?" "This is Officer Daniels from the County Detention Center. You're listed as a contact for an inmate, Ethan Graves." The name hit like a nail gun to the chest. "What about him?" The officer hesitated. "He's filed a complaint. Says his arrest was entrapment. Claims you set him up with falsified documents. We're required to inform you he's pursuing legal action." I nearly laughed. He forged my signature, tried to sell my kidney, and now I set him up? "I'm just doing my job, sir," the officer said. "You might want to speak with your attorney." When I hung up, the silence in the workshop felt too big. George had warned me this might happen. Desperate men always look for someone else to blame. But what chilled me wasn't the complaint. It was the way Ethan's mind worked. He'd been humiliated, caged, and stripped of control. That kind of man doesn't fade quietly. He festers. That evening, I told Emily. Her face went pale, the old panic flickering in her eyes. "Dad, he can't win, right? You have proof. You have everything." "I do," I said. "But that doesn't mean he won't try." She clenched her hands. "I can't go through that again." "You won't," I said. "Not this time." I meant it. But that night, when the wind rattled the windows, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how men like Ethan survive, not by strength, but by manipulation. They find cracks in people's fear and crawl through them. 2 weeks later, something strange happened. I came home from the grocery store to find an envelope wedged under the door. No stamp, no address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a photo, Emily leaving work, walking to her car. The shot was taken from a distance, through a windshield. Underneath, written in pen, "You took everything from me. I can take her." My stomach turned cold. I checked the street, but the only movement was the wind pushing a loose trash can. Still, I knew Ethan hadn't done this alone. He was locked up, but he had friends, the same kind who haunted Atlantic City bars and owed him favors. That night, I called George again. He told me to stay calm, that he'd contact the police. But calm wasn't an option anymore. Someone had crossed my line. They'd brought fear back into my daughter's life. I checked the locks, set up cameras, and moved my old hunting rifle from the attic to the closet beside my bed. I hadn't fired it in years, but the weight of it still felt right in my hands. It wasn't about violence. It was about readiness. About telling the world I wouldn't be a victim twice. Days passed without another message. Emily thought maybe it was a bluff, a scare tactic. I wanted to believe her. Until one night, around midnight, I saw headlights stop in front of the house. They lingered too long. The engine idled. Then, slowly, the car rolled away. The next morning, there was another note. This time, taped to the mailbox. "You should have stayed weak, old man." That was the moment something old and dark stirred in me. Not rage, not vengeance, something colder. Survival. The same instinct that kept me alive through surgery, through betrayal, through the wreckage of family. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man defending the last good thing left in his life. I called George again. "Forget the complaint," I said. "We're going to make sure he never gets out." "How?" he asked. "By giving them everything I didn't before," I said. "Every name, every file, every proof of what that man's done." George hesitated. "Jeremy, if you do that, you're burning bridges. You'll drag Emily into it." "I'm not burning bridges," I said. "I'm burning rot." Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Photos of the Neptune Club, receipts, old contacts, the nurse's confession, and the audio files we hadn't turned over before. When George saw it all laid out, he shook his head slowly. "You could bury him with this," he murmured. "That's the point," I said. We filed a full report to the district attorney. Within a week, Ethan's case escalated from fraud to organized medical trafficking. The club owners, Marco, Darius, the man they called Boss, were pulled in too. The story hit local news, not with my name, but with theirs. Illegal organ ring busted in Atlantic County. I watched the broadcast from my living room, the glow of the TV flickering against the framed family photo on the wall. The anchor's voice was calm, detached, just another crime story. But for me, it was the sound of justice finally sealing the coffin. Ethan's face flashed on screen for 3 seconds before it cut to footage of the Neptune Club raid. That was all I needed. Emily sat beside me, silent, eyes fixed on the screen. "It's over, isn't it?" she whispered. I looked at her and nodded. "It's over for him," I said. "Now it's time to start living for us." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The kind that doesn't come from victory, but from survival. Still, as the news ended and the screen went black, I caught my reflection in the glass. Tired, older, but unbroken. And I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge doesn't make you whole. It just makes sure the people who broke you never do it again. That would have to be enough. You can build a house strong enough to stand through a hurricane, but you can't build one quiet enough to keep out ghosts. Even when the news stopped talking about the Neptune Club, I could still feel its shadow at the edge of my life. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a memory of Ethan's footsteps. Every car slowing outside made my pulse tighten. Emily thought it was over. She was smiling again, planting herbs in the backyard, humming songs she used to love as a girl. Sometimes, when I saw her through the kitchen window, the late afternoon light caught her hair, and I almost believed that life had given us back what it took. But peace never lasts when evil feels cheated. It started with small things. A dead bird left on the porch. The gate swinging open even when I knew I'd latched it. A scratch down the side of my truck, long and deliberate. Maybe kids, maybe drunks, that's what the police said. But I've lived too long to believe in coincidence. One night, I came home late from the hardware store and saw a shadow move near the shed. I froze, letting my eyes adjust. The moon was bright enough to paint the figure's outline. A man in a hooded jacket, crouching. I raised my voice. "Who's there?" The figure bolted, darting toward the alley. I gave chase without thinking, my boots pounding the dirt. The years had slowed me, but rage lends its own strength. The man disappeared into a waiting car, tires screeching as it tore down the street. I stood there in the exhaust smoke, breath fogging, and knew it wasn't random. Someone was testing the walls again, looking for weak spots. The next morning, I found a note nailed to the shed door. "You took him from us. Now we take something from you." I felt my chest tighten, a cold familiar pain under the scar. I tore the note down and burned it in the sink, but the words stayed. They always do. I called George. He wanted to call the cops again, but I told him no. The law was slow, and this wasn't a courtroom fight. This was personal. For 3 nights, I barely slept. I kept the rifle by my chair, the porch light on, my mind sharpened to every sound. Emily begged me to let it go, to move somewhere else. We could sell the house, Dad, start over. But I couldn't. This was my home. The one place I'd built with my own hands. I wasn't running again. Then, on the 4th night, it happened. I woke to the crash of glass. A sound too loud to be an accident. I grabbed the rifle and moved toward the noise. The kitchen window was shattered, moonlight spilling through the shards. And there, standing halfway inside, was a man I recognized. Marco, the thin, jittery friend of Ethan's. His face was older, rougher, his eyes glassy and desperate. He stepped fully inside, knife flashing in his hand. "Where's the money, old man?" he hissed. "You think you can ruin people's lives and sleep like a king?" "There's no money," I said quietly, raising the rifle. "Just mistakes and consequences." He laughed, a harsh, empty sound. "You think I'm scared of you? You got lucky once." "Luck had nothing to do with it," I said. For a moment, we stood in the dim kitchen, 2 men separated by time and choices. He was what Ethan would have become if he'd been given a few more years of rot. I saw fear behind the rage, not of me, but of the world closing in on him. He lunged. The motion was clumsy, reckless. I sidestepped, the way instinct teaches a man who spent a life avoiding falling beams and swinging tools. The rifle but caught his shoulder. The knife clattered to the floor. We struggled, breath against breath, his hands clawing, my pulse hammering. Then, with one hard push, he stumbled backward into the counter. He froze when he saw the barrel leveled at his chest. "I'm not going to kill you," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I want you to live with what you've done." For a second, his eyes darted, wild and cornered. "You can't stop all of us," he spat. "There's more." The rest of his sentence died under the sirens. George had called the police anyway. Within minutes, blue lights flooded the windows. Marco dropped the knife and fell to his knees, muttering curses as the officers cuffed him. I gave my statement while Emily stood by, tears streaking her cheeks. She clung to my arm, trembling. When the police took him away, the officer turned to me and said, "You've got enemies, Mr. Collins. Maybe it's time to think about protection or moving." I shook my head. "I've protected myself my whole life. I'll be fine." But that night, as I sat in the workshop, the truth pressed down on me. Revenge never really ends. It just changes hands. Emily came in quietly, sat beside me. "He's gone," she said. "For now," I replied. "There's always another one waiting for the debt to be paid." She took my hand, small and trembling in mine. Then we faced them together. The words were simple, but they rooted something steady inside me. I wasn't just an old man fighting ghosts anymore. I was a father who still had someone worth standing for. Outside, dawn broke over the neighborhood, painting the street in soft gold. The world looked the same, but something had shifted inside me. I had fought my war, buried my enemies, and protected what was left. But peace isn't about the absence of threats. It's the decision to stop letting them own you. As I watched the sun rise, I finally let go of the last piece of hatred I'd been carrying. The past was still there, burned, scarred, but silent. And that silence was the kind of victory a man like me could live with. It took 3 months before I agreed to see him. The letter came from the correctional facility in Rahway, neat and impersonal. "Inmate Ethan Graves has requested a visit." I stared at it for a full hour before setting it aside. Emily found it on the table later that day. She didn't ask, but her silence said enough. I didn't know Ethan a single second more of my life. But something about unfinished work sits wrong in me, always has. I couldn't leave a beam half-cut or a wall half-painted. I needed to see the man who'd tried to carve out a piece of me, one last time, if only to make sure he stayed buried in the past. The morning of the visit, New Jersey was gray and wet. The kind of morning that smelled like old rain and regret. I wore my best jacket, the one Emily had mended after my surgery, and drove alone. The prison sat on the edge of town, surrounded by fences that hummed like cold metal insects. At the gate, a guard checked my ID, stamped my wrist, and pointed me toward the visitors' hall. The room was all concrete and silence, the kind of place that squeezes truth out of people. When Ethan walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Prison had stripped him of everything: his swagger, his smile, his tan. His hair was cropped close, his face hollowed out. He looked older than me now, and that was saying something. He sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The guard's presence at the door made every word feel heavier. "You look good," he said finally, voice dry. "For a man who ruined my life." I studied him. "You ruined it yourself. I just stopped you before you ruined mine." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Still think you're the hero, huh?" "I never was the hero," I said. "Just the fool who thought you loved my daughter." That hit him. Just a flicker, but I saw it. A crack behind the mask. He leaned forward. "You don't get it. I was trying to survive. I made mistakes, yeah, but I loved her. I still do." "Love," I repeated quietly. "You used her fear to feed your greed. That's not love, Ethan. That's hunger." He clenched his fists. "You think I'm worse than you? You control everyone around you, Jeremy. You build fences out of kindness so people stay in your debt. You raised her to need you. Maybe that's why she picked me, because she wanted to break free." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent my whole life building walls. To protect, yes, but maybe also to keep from being hurt again. And now here he was, broken and spiteful, finding the weak spots even from across a table. I met his glare. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I did build walls. But you brought fire into that house, Ethan. You tried to burn everything I loved. And for that, I'll never apologize for putting you out. He laughed softly, bitter. They're transferring me soon, he said. Federal facility. Longer term. Guess you got what you wanted. I looked at him for a long time. What I wanted, I said, was for Emily to sleep at night without checking the locks twice. What I wanted was a world where her kindness wasn't a weapon used against her. What I wanted was to stop seeing your shadow in my own home. He went quiet. The guards shifted near the door. The clock ticked too loud. Finally, Ethan said, "You're not coming back, are you?" "No," I said. "This is the last time you'll ever see me." He nodded slowly. "Good," he muttered. "I'd rather remember hating you than needing you." I stood, picked up my coat, and looked down at him one last time. "That's the difference between us," I said. "You think needing someone makes you weak. I think it's what makes us human." Then I turned and walked out. The air outside hit me like release. Cold, sharp, alive. I stood by the fence for a while, watching the razor wire glint under the pale sun. It looked like silver veins, cruel, perfect, and final. On the drive home, the clouds broke, and a streak of light touched the highway. I rolled down the window and let the wind slap my face. It smelled like rain and sawdust, my kind of peace. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask how it went. She just looked at me with those same eyes she had as a child, searching for something honest. "Did you say what you needed to say?" she asked. "I said enough," I told her. She nodded and smiled softly. "Then maybe we can finally move on." I looked at the house behind her, the porch rail fixed, the birdhouse swaying, the garden growing in green patches again. For the first time, it looked alive. I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need to win. I just needed to stop carrying the wreckage. I stepped onto the porch, kissed my daughter on the forehead, and whispered, "We already have." That night, I slept with the window open. The world outside was quiet, but not empty, a kind of silence that felt earned. And for the first time since it all began, I didn't dream about Ethan, or hospitals, or debts. I dreamed of wood shavings and the sound of a hammer. The sound of a man building something again, not breaking it apart. By summer, the world outside had changed again. The trees were heavy with green. The air smelled of lilacs and fresh-cut grass. And for the first time in years, I could walk down my own street without looking over my shoulder. Emily and I had decided to leave New Jersey, not to escape, but to start over. Too many ghosts here, too many eyes that knew our story. We found a small place upstate, 2 bedrooms, a workshop out back, and a porch that faced a lake. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be earned, only respected. I spent my mornings sanding oak planks for a new table, and my afternoons teaching Emily how to work the lathe. She said the rhythm of it calmed her mind. I told her it's because wood doesn't lie. It shows every mark you make. For a while, it felt like life had finally settled into something soft and steady. Then the letter came. It was a plain brown envelope, no return address, no markings. The postman said it had been forwarded twice, once from the old house in New Jersey and once from the county clerk's office. I didn't open it right away. It sat on the table for 2 days, the paper whispering temptation every time I passed. On the 3rd morning, I gave in. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, deliberate. "Ethan's. Jeremy, I don't expect you to answer. I just want you to know what happened. They're moving me again, further north this time. I'm not sick, not dying, but things inside here change fast. You start thinking about what's left behind." I heard Emily moved. "Good. She deserves peace. Tell her I'm sorry, not for what I did, but for what she lost because of me. I don't hate you anymore. Maybe I should, but I don't. You were right about me. I was hungry. I mistook desperation for love. Maybe someday, when I'm gone, she'll forgive me. You don't have to. You already won." I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. My hands didn't shake, not like they used to, but something inside me did. A strange, quiet ache. Not pity, not forgiveness, just a small sadness for a life that could have been different. Emily found me sitting there, the letter folded in half. "Who's it from?" she asked. "Ethan," I said softly. She froze, her breath catching. "What does he want now?" "Nothing. Maybe just to say goodbye." She stood in silence for a moment, then reached out and took the letter. Her eyes moved over the words carefully, line by line. When she was done, she let out a long breath and said, "He finally sounds human." "Prison does that," I said. "It strips you until all that's left is truth or nothing." She looked at me, searching my face. "Do you forgive him?" I thought about it, really thought. The weight of years, the pain, the betrayal. Forgive, I said finally. No, but I don't hate him anymore either. Maybe that's enough. She nodded and placed the letter back on the table. What will you do with it? I stared at the folded paper for a while. Then I picked it up, walked outside, and laid it on the workbench next to a piece of maple I'd been carving. The wind rustled through the trees. I'll turn it into something useful, I said. I used the paper as kindling that evening when I lit the stove in the workshop. The fire caught quickly, curling the words into sparks. I watched the smoke twist upward, carrying Ethan's last words into the dark. Emily stood beside me, her hand slipping into mine. You think he meant it? She asked. I think he meant it in the only way he could, I said. Sometimes that's all a man can give. We stood there until the fire burned down to embers. The smell of wood and ash mixed with summer air, soft and bittersweet. For the first time in years, the past didn't feel like a wound, just an old scar that no longer hurt when you touched it. Later that night, we sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder and said, Do you think people like him ever really change? I thought for a moment. Change? I said, maybe not, but sometimes they understand, and that's close enough. She smiled faintly. You sound like you've changed. Maybe I have, I said. Maybe surviving changes you whether you want it to or not. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, calm and endless. Somewhere across the water, a loon called, its cry echoing like memory. I looked at the reflection of our little house in the dark glass of the lake, the light in the window, the faint trail of smoke from the chimney, and realized something I hadn't before. Peace isn't a reward. It's a choice you make every day to stop feeding your anger. And as the fireflies blinked like tiny stars over the grass, I finally felt it, the quiet I'd been chasing all my life. The story that had started in betrayal ended not with vengeance, but with stillness. And for me, that was enough. A year has passed since the letter burned. The lake has frozen and thawed twice. The birdhouse outside has weathered a full season of storms and still hangs straight. Time has slowed its march into something gentler. I turned 70 last month. Emily baked a pie instead of a cake because she said pies feel like home. She brought candles anyway, and when she sang, her voice shook a little. Maybe from memory, maybe from love. When she hugged me afterward, I could feel her heartbeat steady and strong against my chest. That sound, not the silence of revenge, but the rhythm of a life still beating. That's what peace truly is. Most mornings I still rise before the sun. Habit. Old men don't sleep late. We listen for the world waking. I sit by the window with my coffee, the wood stove popping softly, and I watch the first light touch the water. The lake doesn't judge. It just reflects what's in front of it, no matter how broken or beautiful. I've started building again, not for clients, not for money, but for meaning. Small things, benches for the neighbors, a toy chest for the boy down the road, birdhouses for the trees around the property. People say it's my way of keeping busy, but they don't understand. Building is how I remember who I am. Revenge tore that out of me once, made me a man defined by what he'd lost. Now, with every nail and board, I'm taking that back. Emily comes by every evening after work. She brings books, stories from the library, sometimes just her presence. We don't talk about Ethan anymore. It's as if his name dissolved with the ashes we sent into the stove. She's dating someone new, a quiet man who teaches history at the community college. The first time he came over, he offered to help me fix the roof. I watched the way he looked at her, not as something to own, but as something to protect, and I knew he was different. Do you approve? She asked me later, half teasing. I smiled. I approve of any man who holds a hammer the right way. She laughed, the same laugh she had when she was a child building birdhouses with me on the porch. Hearing it again was like hearing a familiar song I thought I'd forgotten. Sometimes I still get letters from the outside, old acquaintances, people who read about the Neptune case and want to call me a hero. I never answer them. Heroes chase glory. I just wanted my life back. One evening in late autumn, I was closing up the workshop when I noticed the sky glowing orange over the water. The reflection made it look like the lake was on fire, though the air was cool and still. I stood there for a long time, thinking about how everything burns eventually. Wood, anger, time, and how the ashes are what feed the next thing that grows. Emily joined me, her hair catching the last of the light. What are you thinking about? She asked. About how every house I ever built eventually needed repairs, I said. But this one's holding strong. She smiled. Maybe because you finally built it for yourself. I looked at her, my daughter, no longer the frightened woman who once wept on my kitchen floor, but someone whole again, stronger than she realized. No, I said softly. I built it for you. For us. We sat together on the porch until the stars came out, the kind of quiet that doesn't need words settling between us. The wind rustled the trees, and the lake shimmered under the moon. Inside, the clock ticked steadily, its rhythm comforting. I thought about all the years I'd spent letting anger measure my time. Now, I had something better to count. Moments of peace, laughter, and the sound of sawdust falling on clean floorboards. Before heading to bed, I walked into the workshop one last time and picked up my carving knife. I etched a few words into the beam above the door. Small, simple, mine. Built from pain. Stood for love. The knife trembled a bit in my hand, but the letters came out steady. When I turned off the light, the house seemed to exhale, like it knew the fight was finally over. Tomorrow, there would be more wood to shape, more repairs to make, more quiet mornings to drink coffee and watch the lake. Nothing perfect. Nothing final. Just life. And for a man who'd once been willing to give his body away to save people who didn't deserve it, that was the truest kind of revenge there is. To keep living, to keep building, and to keep standing.